Miller for Congress. I thought I would just pop on here and, talk a little bit from my perspective as a candidate about what the failure of the peace negotiations meant. We saw that just happened. And if you have any comments, if you're watching this, we're streaming live on YouTube and on Facebook. If you have any comments, put them in the chat, questions. I'll be happy to respond to anything. So we just saw J.D. Vance come out, and I watched some of his remarks that he gave. And he said, the Trump administration doesn't make any sense. They're really in a screwed up position vis-a-vis Iran or Iran, because when Vance came out, he said, well, we destroyed their nuclear program, but we haven't seen the will of Iran to not want to have a nuclear weapon. So basically the administration's position now, the Trump administration's position, is that Iran, whatever you want to call it, is not allowed to pursue a nuclear weapon. So that is the position of the Trump administration, is that apparently so long as Iran wants to have a nuclear weapon, we're going to have a problem with them. I guess that's the position. I guess my question is, why does the United States of America, why do we get to have a veto power? Why do we think we get to have a veto power over what Iran does? Okay. I mean, look at all the countries that have nuclear weapons. You got China, you have India, you have Pakistan, you have Russia, Israel has them, we have them. Lots of countries have nuclear weapons. Why is it, it's my question, to the Trump administration and to anybody else, why is it that people are saying Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon? Why? What do we think the Iranians are going to do that other countries wouldn't do? Do you really think, for example, that the Iranians are as warlike as the Israelis? I mean, how many people in recent history have the Israelis killed versus how many the Iranians have killed? Do you really think that the Chinese government is a benevolent government? Of course not. But there has been this idea created within the American-Israeli lobby and culture that it is our right as Americans to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And listen, folks, I'm just going to tell you the reality of the situation. We have to be real about this, okay? And I know that the talking heads, people like Troy Downing and others in the Republican Party, Steve Daines, Tim Sheehy, Zinke, people that just they don't think for themselves. They're not rational thinkers. They're not strategic thinkers. They just say whatever Donald Trump and other people in the Republican Party are telling them to say. I know that those people will say that you have to do everything you can to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, right? Well, Trump had that chance in the negotiations before this war started. I read the analysis, and you can go back and you can look at it yourself. But the Omanis were negotiating a deal, and everybody was saying, even third-party independent experts were saying that if Trump had taken this deal, he would have gotten the best deal that anyone ever got on Iran. The best deal, hands down. The Iranians were considering, for example, allowing their enriched uranium to leave the country in order to satisfy, whatever people wanted. And, we need to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the history of Iran, because you never hear about this in the media. You always just hear propaganda, and you never hear a deep dive into the history of Iran. And I think you need to hear it at some point in time, because when you look at the history, and I've taken time to do that since I've been running for Congress, I've been doing research. I feel it is my responsibility, if I want to represent people in Montana's 2nd Congressional District, that I be informed. So I've taken pains to go and try to understand what's going on with this. And context is important, okay? So the Islamic Revolution occurred in 1979. And the backstory on that, for those of you that don't know, is that in the early 50s, the United States government overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran, because they were too socialist for the Americans, so they thought they had a right to go change it. And at that time in the 50s, everybody was hypersensitive about communism. So the thinking in United States military-industrial complex was that if any countries have any socialist-leaning tendencies, we're going to take them out. And they did that in Iran, and they did that in Guatemala as well, right around the same time period. So you had that happen in the early 1950s, and then the United States government with the CIA installed the Shah of Iran over the Iranian people. And the Shah ruled for, 20 something odd years, and it was a brutal dictatorship. It was very similar to the types of dictatorships that we saw in the 70s and 80s in Central and South America. If you are familiar with that history, you know what I'm talking about. I've spent some time in Guatemala back in the 90s. I'm familiar with some of the history down there. And so basically, it was this period of time when the United States of America was trying to control as many spheres of influence as it could against the quote unquote perceived threat of communism. Okay, so we did that in Iran, and it was a brutal dictatorship. And so the Iranians eventually overthrew the dictator, and you had the Iranian Revolution, a very hardcore conservative strain of Shia Muslim. It doesn't or Islam. It doesn't represent all the strains of Islam. Okay, Islam, like any other religion, has its conservative sides and its more liberal sides. I mean, every religion has those. Islam is no different. When the Iranian Revolution and Ayatollah Khomeini came into power, one of the demands that they had was that the West return the Shah of Iran to Iran to face trial and face justice. And obviously, they were going to execute him. I mean, that's what they were going to do. But you know what? You live by the sword, you die by the sword, right? I mean, if you're going to torture people and you're going to do all this stuff to people, well, if they come in power, if the people you've oppressed come in power, they might want to kill you. I mean, that's just what happens when you treat people like that. The West, however, refused to return the Shah, and I think he was in medical treatment in England or someplace else. Bottom line is, the reason why the Iranians took hostages in 1979 was because the United States wouldn't return the Shah of Iran. And you never hear this. I mean, you never hear this side of the story in all of this warmongering that's going on right now. They just pretend like, if you listen to the American system, you would think that one day the Iranians just woke up and decided that they just want to start a beef with the United States of America. And that is not at all, what happened. That is not at all the reality of what occurred here. Okay. So in any event, we didn't return the Shah of Iran. They took the hostages for 444 days, I think it was. And then, to make a long story short, when Jimmy Carter was in office, it was a huge fiasco. When Ronald Reagan came into power, I don't know exactly what he did, but they made some deals with the Iranians, and then we got the hostages back. And then after that, the Iranian government and the United States government actually signed a peace accord in Algiers and settled their disputes. And then the only other thing that happened, which was a tragic thing, was that Hezbollah, in I think it was 1982 or 83, bombed Marine barracks in Lebanon and killed several hundred Marines. Now, Hezbollah is certainly a proxy of Iran, and you could definitely say that if Hezbollah does something, that's basically Iran. That's a fair inference to draw. But at the time, Ronald Reagan was the president, and when those Marines were killed, he decided to withdraw from the Middle East, and that was a smart move to make. So that goes forward. Now, in the 1980s, and again, we're getting to this idea. I want you folks to understand, because you never hear this anywhere. I want you to understand the actual history of how we got here. Just a brief summary. And if you have questions or comments, throw them in the chat. I can see them and I will respond to them. So in the 1980s, Iraq and Iran were in a war, and it was a very violent war, and we were supporting the Iraqi government against the Iranian government, and we were supporting Saddam Hussein, who, as you know, we later then had to go invade, and he was our enemy. And this is a thing that happens all the time in United States history from the 70s on. We create these monsters. They're our friends until they're not our friends, and then we got to go send our people over and spend our money killing these people that we spent building up. Okay? As a congressperson, I want to stop all of that stuff. I have studied the history of foreign policy in the 20th century. It's a freaking mess. It's a shit show. And the problem with it is that it's not based on but common sense morality. And I think in the 21st century, we need to have a foreign policy that is based on common sense morality, and I think the world would be a lot safer. Okay? It's not as easy for generals and the military industrial complex and all the war pigs and the warmongers, because then it's not as hard to, it's harder to start wars when you're just being honest. But it's what we need to do. So anyway, in the 1980s, Iraq and Iran are fighting each other. And a lot of people don't know this. But the Iraqis were using chemical weapons on the Iranians. And Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the first Ayatollah of the Islamic Revolution, was approached by the Revolutionary Guard, and they said, "Sir, we need to have chemical weapons against Iraq." And Ayatollah Khomeini said, "No, it's against Islam." And he actually issued a fatwa in the 80s against the use of chemical weapons. And you never ever hear this because they want to tell you that the Iranians are just, complete irrational people. They're going to blow up the world. And their history actually shows that they made a conscious choice in the 1980s to abandon chemical weapons against the Iraqis. And it has nothing to do with the United States of America. This was two different, these were Shiites and Shia Muslims. In Iraq, Saddam's Ba'ath Party was the opposing faction. So it's kind of like the war between the Protestants and the Catholics in Europe in the Middle Ages, right? Today, for us in America, we can't even conceive of Protestants and Catholics going out and killing each other. It seems unbelievable to us, but yet that is what they used to do in Europe, and it was, insane. And we hope and pray that one day these various factions in Islam will also find peace with each other and will not have to do these things. Nevertheless, in that same period of time that Khomeini issued his fatwa against chemical weapons, members of the Revolutionary Guard also approached him and said, "Hey, sir, we should develop nuclear weapons to protect us." And he said the same thing. He said that nuclear weapons are incompatible with their readings of Islam. Now, on the nuclear question, Ayatollah Khomeini did not issue a fatwa. However, the guy that we just killed, Khamenei, did issue a fatwa against nuclear weapons in 2003. And he said in his fatwa that development of nuclear weapons is incompatible with their interpretation of Iran. And this, again, this was issued, people need to, circumstances matter. This was issued back in 2003. We were not beefing with Iran in 2003. This had nothing to do with us at all. But you never ever hear anybody say this. The warmongers never want you to hear that this appears to be a genuine position taking by the Iranians in 2003. And again, it was consistent with Ayatollah Khomeini's initial fatwa against chemical weapons. And, we don't have fatwas here in our religious systems in Christianity. I mean, you have papal bulls sometimes in the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic, so I'm familiar with those. The Pope does issue some things, but they don't have the weight that a fatwa does in the Islamic Republic of Iran. They just have a very heavy weight. And how like Trump's always issuing this order or that order, or saying this thing or that thing, and then he just changes his mind one day and it's over. Yeah, you can't do that with a fatwa. You can't do. If it's going to get reversed, it has to go through these councils and all this stuff. It's a huge process. So they're very meticulous about this when they issue these things, right? So anyway, that's what you had in 2003. That's the guy that Trump killed. That's the guy, Khamenei, who, by all accounts, and this is from third parties, the Omanis and others, said that before this war operation Jeffrey Epstein started, that the Iranians were really talking with us about allowing their enriched nuclear uranium to be taken off site, which now we're being told is the big hangup. Okay, and this is something else that we need to be cognizant of when we're analyzing this situation. As someone who's running for Congress, I have a responsibility to articulate to people who are thinking of voting for me what my position is on this and how I'd vote. This is a very serious issue, people. I mean, this Iran thing. I mean, it hasn't really hit us with the full force and effect that it is going to hit us with. I mean, this could be I mean, it already is a world changing event. And if you're interested, you can go on my Spotify account. You can go find me, Brian Miller, and you can look at the first podcast, first cast I did. I really went into the Strait of Hormuz. I had graphics, I had videos, I had all kinds of things. So you can go back and you can look at that first episode, and you can see that this Strait of Hormuz issue, man, this is we're not gonna that's leverage that they're not giving up, and we are not going to take the Strait of Hormuz. It is not going to happen. Okay, which now is something that is a big deal to everybody. We have all seen, the rest of us have seen what a big deal the Strait of Hormuz is. However, they've known about this for a long, long time, back since the 80s. And in fact, again, go back to that first podcast I did. I did that for a reason. It's on Spotify. I have video from Newt Gingrich in March talking about the fact that during the Reagan era, when he and Larry Kudrow's a Fox News guy now, but they were both in the White House together, and they talked about this in the 80s. And I think this is why Reagan decided to get the hell out of the Middle East, because he understood that the Strait of Hormuz was a serious economic vulnerability. It was a serious economic choke point on the world economy, and there would be nothing we could do about it. And that's just the way that situation is. It's just how things developed. It's a strategic position in the world, and it is what it is. And we've known about it for a long, long time. So when we started this war, we had a chance to negotiate an excellent deal with the Iranians. Trump, however, in my opinion, there was two factors that pushed him to war. One was the Israelis had been, manipulating him. And we all know that Trump is getting old and feeble, and he doesn't make sense. And they should really invoke the 25th Amendment on him. I mean, nobody likes his ass anymore. Sorry, I lost the camera there for a second. I was saying nobody really likes Trump anymore, so I don't think anybody would miss him if the 25th Amendment is evoked. I think everybody would be pretty happy about that. But anyway, he's feeble-minded, and the Israelis have been, it's kind of like a running joke now. It's like for 47 years, the Israelis have been telling everyone that Iran is a weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And that's what they've been saying over and over and over again. So they got Trump. Trump's kind of like that guy in the first Lord of the Rings movie that's whispering in the king's ear. It's the same. That's what Netanyahu did. So that's one factor. And then the other factor is a distraction from the Epstein files. Because if you will go back into the record and look at this, because I've been following all this stuff more closely than I would have since I'm running for office, and this stuff's all very relevant. If you will go back and look at the timing of this, there were documents in the Epstein files where a complaining witness was saying that Trump raped her when she was 13 years old. And people that were looking through the Epstein files noticed that the FBI had not produced that document. And then the FBI did, in fact, produce that document. And it was right when we had the start of the Iran war. I don't think the timing is a coincidence at all. So we also got to remember this, is that Trump was looking for a win. He just went into Venezuela, and he's not very smart on foreign policy, and he's been talking about invading Iran since the 80s. And so he just thought, wait, I did it in Venezuela, let's go do it in Iran. Also, we have to remember that according to reporting, the general said, don't do this, sir. And one of the things they warned him about was the Strait of Hormuz. So when the war started, remember, we saw all these shifting rationales. First, Marco Rubio accidentally said the truth. He said, well, Israel was going to attack them first. We had to attack, which tells you that Israel was driving the train on this, right? And then you said, well, we got a regime change. And they said, well, we got to get their nuclear weapons. But then people said, I thought we did that already, you know. And then they said, well, we got to save the Iranian people from the mullahs. It was all over the place. And now it became this crazy, crazy situation where a focal point, it's the focal point that everybody knew about, is opening the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you want to see a brilliant analysis on this, go to the reels on my Facebook page, because I just put today up there a hilarious skit from JP Sears, and he's like a, I don't know, I guess he used to be a MAGA comedian. I don't know if MAGA exists anymore. I don't really know what the hell it is. But anyway, now he's extremely critical of Trump, and he is extremely critical of Israel being in control of our U.S. military, which anybody should be. And he did a really hilarious skit. Go check it out on the reels. He just really explains it. Okay, so now we're in this huge pickle. And any comments or questions or whatever, throw them in the chats. If you're on Facebook, you can go in there and throw them on, or YouTube. I'll see both of them on my panel over here. I will respond to them. But so now we're in this crazy pickle, right? Because we've all seen what the Strait of Hormuz can do. And I've been watching this very closely. You know, I've been watching the business channels. I've been reading on this. I've been watching what experts have been saying, and I'll just tell you, what we're seeing economically. And again, if you want to see the details of the Strait of Hormuz and why we cannot take it, go back and watch my first episode on Spotify. One of the things I have on there is a clip from Lieutenant Colonel Douglas McGregor, who is a guy that's been in a lot of combat, and he has this clip. It's like 3 or 4 minutes long, and he has a map and everything, and he goes through it and runs through it, and he says, yeah, you are not taking the Strait of Hormuz, United States. And he's one of our guys. Okay, he's one of our guys. So we're in this situation now, and the Strait of Hormuz, we have all seen, those of us that didn't really understand it, didn't know about it, hadn't thought about it, we've all seen just how big of a deal it is. Now, before the current situation started with the ceasefire, whatever you want to call it, the Strait of Hormuz, the restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz were causing about a 7 to 11% drop in global oil supplies, also fertilizer. And we're here in Montana, right? We're here in Montana, and you can go and ask farmers right now. They've seen a 50% increase in fertilizer because so much fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's off right now, and it's been disrupted. And it's kind of like similar things where we saw with Trump's tariffs, where there's a delay in these global markets are big machines that are moving all the time. We don't see them. But I mean, I tell you, you go back and, like, for instance, go and look at that, my Spotify thing I did. I've got a map that's one of those maps you can see of all the ships that are in there. And by the way, the strait's not technically closed. They're letting some ships go through. But you see all these ships, tons and tons of traffic that normally would be flowing. It's still there. A lot of us just aren't aware of this, but it's a thing. So we've got this big machine that's been shut down, and so the ripple effects are going to catch up with us soon. 7 to 11% drop in oil flows. I have seen economists on different shows, and I try to watch different ones: Fox, CNBC, Bloomberg. I look around and stuff. But what I've been seeing as a consensus from most economists is that the global economy just can't take much of that for very long before we're going to see huge, huge shocks to the market, bigger than what we've already seen. We're already seeing some, right? We're already seeing some shocks, but bigger shocks than what we're even seeing right now. And, one of the things, Trump is just, I don't know if he's just being completely dishonest or if he's just being stupid. I don't know. But one of the things that Trump has said to people, he said, look, don't worry about it, folks. We make all of our own oil. We don't need Congress. Remember he said that? Well, that's bullshit. You know why? Because even if we make the oil here in the United States, first off, our refining capacity is not that great, so we still have to refine it. But secondarily, prices for oil are globally set. They're not set just based on the domestic market. So unless you're going to nationalize the oil industry and set the prices, okay, if you're not willing to do that, then all the prices for our oil is hooked in to the global markets. So it doesn't matter if we make it here or not. You're not going to get it cheaper. You're not going to get cheaper oil in America because it's made here. That is not going to happen. That is not how global markets work. So, this is a huge problem. And another thing that he says sometimes is he says, well, that oil goes to India and China, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Guess where we buy a lot of our stuff from? India and China. So again, if the costs go up in the production of goods in China because fuel's up, what's going to happen? We're going to pay it. The entire global economy is connected in the 21st century, and that's a function of the internet and how fast things move and global markets and everything. I mean, this is a different. 100 years ago, you could reasonably say that certain markets were kind of cut off from each other. The world was less developed. That's not the world we live in anymore. And we have to start being realistic about that. So that's all background and everything kind of getting into the history of this and everything. So where does that leave us today? Like, what's going to happen next? Because that's the question that we really need to answer. And we need to we're going to have some hard truths on this. I'm going to say some things here in a minute that some people will probably attack me for, but it's truth. And I view it as my responsibility to speak the truth as somebody that wants to represent you in Congress. I'm not going to sit here and try to weasel out of this to say some bullshit. We need to get real. We need to get serious. Okay. So we just had the negotiations failed, and now they're not talking about regime change anymore. They're not talking about that Iran can't have missiles. They're not talking about any of that stuff. With J.D. Vance said that we destroyed their nuclear program, but now he says he wants the Iranians, to commit to not having a nuclear weapon. That is not going to happen. That is not going to happen. And this is the thing, and I don't care who wants to get mad. We're going to have to accept that Iran's probably going to get a nuclear weapon because of Donald Trump. We're just going to have to accept that because Iran has, as a rational state actor, which Iran has proven that it is, okay? Now, the regime treats its people like shit. I don't deny that. They do the same thing in Russia. They do the same thing in China. But they're still rational state actors. I mean, Russia's a little different. Russia's kind of nutty. But China, they treat their people horribly. They're still a rational state actor, okay? They oppress their people. The Iranian regime oppresses the people. Hell, Trump, here in the United States, he wishes he could oppress us all right. I mean, if we didn't have a Second Amendment and a First Amendment, he already would have been killing a lot more of us and putting the screws to us. It's only because we have that First, Second, Fourth Amendment that we're free right now. If we didn't have those, if those weren't part of American culture, we would be slaves, complete and total slaves to Donald Trump right now. That is what he wants. He wants to make us all into slaves. But in those other countries, in Iran and China and all these other places, they don't have a First and Second and Fourth Amendment that's part of their culture. Thank God we still do. Thank God that people, except for the Republican Party doesn't really believe in the Bill of Rights anymore. But thank God for Democrats, independents, libertarians, constitutionalists, everybody except Republicans that still believes in the Constitution. Okay, thank God for all of us, the rest of us outside of the Republicans. Okay, so, but Iran is a rational state actor, and they are going to get a nuclear weapon now because of Donald Trump. So this is the first thing that we're going to have to accept. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and people can attack me. I don't really give a shit because it's true. We are just going to have to accept that Iran is going to get that now. Nothing we can do. And it's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault because Trump had an opportunity to negotiate a deal that all the experts say would have stopped Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Obama, for as weak as he was, whatever, and we can criticize him, all they did was criticize him for the JCPOA. Okay, fine. Let's say that it wasn't a great deal. But it was still a deal. You still had negotiations. You had nuclear inspectors. Maybe they weren't perfect, but it was happening. Maybe more needed to be done, but it was happening. Okay? And inside Iran, by the way, there was a lot of internal division because even though the people in Iran don't get to participate in their government, there is differences of opinion within the ruling class. It's not a monolithic class, right? There are people in Iran who are more moderate, and there are people who are more conservative and hardline. And the moderates and the people that said, yes, let's cut deals with the United States. Yes, let's work with them. We don't need nuclear weapons. Let's give it up. Okay? They're done now. They're done. They've lost all credibility in Iran. So now we're just getting hardliners. And now, the guy that's running it right now, of course, his dad was killed by the United States. How do you think he feels about the United States of America? Do you think he wants to? You think he's going to be excited to cut deals with us now? I don't think so. And again, Trump did that. This is the kind of stuff that Trump did. We had a good situation that we could have dealt with there. And Trump, because he was being manipulated by the Israelis and he wanted distraction from the Epstein files, he decided to start a war. So here we are to have to clean this shit up, right? And the first thing we have to do is just accept the new reality. Iran is going to get a nuclear weapon. It's just going to happen. Now, what are they going to do with a nuclear weapon, though? Honestly, what are they going to do? Israel has it also. China has it also. India and Pakistan have them also. Why does anybody think Iran's going to set off a nuclear weapon? Why would they set off a nuclear weapon? And I don't know, maybe you could be concerned about them doing a dirty bomb or whatever, but guess what? Russia could do that too. China could do that too. This is just the reality. And if you watch political analysis experts, it's not just me, but you go online and you watch and you see actual experts, they are all saying, every single one of the legitimate ones are saying that Trump created a nuclear-armed oil hegemon and that Iran, because of Donald Trump, is now going to join the world superpower status because of the Strait of Hormuz and because the Strait of Hormuz is a choke point in this global economy. And that is a fact that we have to deal with. So, my position on it now, and it might change, but here's my position for those of you that want to know how someone who could be representing you in Congress feels about this. I'll tell you what my position is. My position is, and I've said this already, is that I'm not going to vote for any money for the Department of War, as they call it, until we get all of our assets, all of our military assets out of the Middle East. Because our presence in the Middle East is what is causing the chaos, and it is what is causing the problems. And so if we want to have peace in the Middle East, we absolutely have to get ourselves out of there. We are the ones that are causing the problems right now. And you know what? We've always been the ones that have been causing the problems. That's why Reagan got out of there. Reagan understood that this was not going to work out for us. And he was smart on that. And then, we know what happened after that. So, we've got to get out of the Middle East. And, this gets to a bigger issue, which is that we have to understand, folks, that this game of the United States being the world's superpower that gets to tell everyone else what to do, yeah, those days are over. Trump killed that too. Okay? You know why Trump killed it? It's very simple. We had a pair of aces, which is a pretty good hand, but a pair of aces gets beat by 3 2s or 3 3s or whatever. It's a good hand. You could do a lot with it, but it's not like a royal flush. We never had that. And that's how Trump acted. Trump acted like he thought we had the best hand in the world, and we didn't. We didn't. And this is why it is so important that we have evidence-based decision-making in our government instead of faith-based decision-making, which is what you have now under this administration. And under all these administrations, you have faith-based decision-making. That's not what we need. We need evidence-based decision-making, but we don't get that right now, okay? If we had evidence-based decision-making, we would have never done this because they would have said, listen, dude, if they start getting, if the Iranians believe that holding control of the Strait of Hormuz is the only thing that'll keep them alive, they're going to fucking do it. And that's exactly what they did. And the Iranians are never going to give up the Strait of Hormuz because they know if they do, they will cease to exist as a nation. They also know that if they want to have an ability to relax and not be attacked all the time, they need to get a nuclear weapon. Because now they know that the United States of America and the Israelis will attack them anytime. Doesn't matter if you're saying they're negotiating, doesn't matter if you're saying anything, that you will always be subject to attack at any point in time by the Americans and the Israelis. Therefore, as a rational state actor, they are going to want a nuclear bomb, and there's not a goddamn thing we can do about it now. because of Donald Trump. However, I do think that at the end of the day, I don't really think that Iran would use a nuclear weapon, and it's for the same reasons that I just gave you. I mean, anybody who does that is going to set off a chain reaction, which is going to come back to them. And I think the Iranians have shown in how they've handled this conflict that they are rational state actors. I mean, look how they have outplayed the United States of America. It's unbelievable. And they did it with pure strategy. Pure strategy. I mean, the Iranian military budget is $9 billion. The United States military budget is over $900 billion. So we have 100 times more than they do, yet they beat us. Do you know why they beat us? Because this is the country that invented chess. And war isn't, as we are all learning now, I mean, I'm not a military guy, but I've read enough military history books and political science books about this to understand the basic principle. You don't need to be a soldier to understand this. You don't need to have fought in war to understand this. As long as you have an analytical mind and you can read things, you can see that war is not just about killing people. It's a multidimensional process. There's a psychological component. There's an economic component. Yes, there's what they call a kinetic. It's their euphemism for killing people. They call it the kinetic aspect of war. Yes, of course. There's many dimensions to war. And if you don't hold them all, you're not going to win. And in this one, we didn't hold the strategic and economic element, nor do we hold the psychological element. Because none of us, I mean, nobody, there's a couple of crazy MAGA people, you see them from time to time, that somehow think this is a good idea. They can never explain why they think it's a good idea, but there's a couple of them out there. But I mean, 70% or whatever, 80%, we don't want this thing, right? We don't want it. So we're not in it. We don't want to go die over there. But the Iranians are absolutely willing to die, and you would be too. You would be too. If you were in their position, okay? If you were just a Iranian, Joe Iranian, okay, and you just happened to be born in Iran, I mean, none of us got to, as far as I know, maybe some people think it's different. I've never heard of anybody that was asked by God before they were born what country they wanted to be. I've never heard that. Maybe there's some people in the Trump administration that had a conversation with God before they were born and they chose America. I've never heard of that. I've never seen it. But maybe some of those people think that they've done it. But most of the time, it's just random. I mean, we all think it's just random. So you got Joe Blow, Iranian over there, and maybe he was moderate. Maybe he hated the regime. Maybe he couldn't stand it. Maybe he had been a protester, okay? But he's going to support the regime now because basically you're telling him, well, you know, we're going to wipe you off the map completely. So he's like, well, nuclear bomb, Strait of Hormuz, whatever. I'd rather be alive than be dead, you know? So that's the pickle that we're in right now. Now, I will tell you this, though, and I could be wrong, okay? I could be wrong, but I'm not, my biggest concern right now is not the Iranians, it's the Trump administration, and I'll tell you why. I think the Iranians, and again, the regime is horrible. We're not excusing the regime, but I'm just looking at them as a state actor compared to China or Russia, who are also just as horrible to their people as the Iranians are. Which is, by the way, if we're going to invade Iran to free those people, why aren't we going to invade China and Russia as well? I mean, the thing doesn't make any sense. Especially, really doesn't make sense Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, look, like I said earlier, if we didn't have a Second and First and Fourth Amendment, Donald Trump would already be killing a lot more of us right now. He just can't do it because there are enough judges and there's enough belief in the Constitution left to prevent it. Thank God, right? But anyway, I'm more worried about Trump than the Iranians. I think the Iranians have shown that they, as horrible as they are to their people, they are acting rationally. They're acting rationally. If you study them, they have plans, they have strategies, and they have made it clear that they have certain things that they're going to do at certain times. They're not just like randomly doing stuff. They have a plan here. And they have actually a plan that is far superior to the United States plan because, again, you know, we have a military budget that's 100 times what they did, and they're winning. They're winning. And even, you know, I didn't mention this, but if you look at some specifics, you know, this war has shown us so many things. I mean, for example, Our interceptor missiles cost about $2 to $3 million a piece to make, and I've seen statistics that say that to take out a couple of these shahids, which could cost between 50, 60, whatever, under $100,000, we got to spend 12 to $11 million. Think about that. We have to spend 12 to $11 million to defeat less than $100 worth of bullets, basically. You can't do that. It's unsustainable. And then we're all familiar with the fact that this happened a couple weeks ago at one of our military bases in Saudi Arabia. We had a $300 million AWACS surveillance plane destroyed by a $30,000 Shahed drone. They spend $30,000, you spend $300 million. You cannot sustain that. I mean, the order of magnitude on that is like 10,000. So they're getting, for every $1 they spend, we have to spend 10,000. And now Trump wants to increase the military budget to $1.5 trillion. And I've said this already, and I've said this in different venues, and I'll keep saying it. And if I get through the primary, I'll be saying it even more. If you send me to Congress, it's what I'm going to do. Is I say we go backwards. I want to see our military budget get around $700 billion. We need to get into the Defense Department. We need to audit that thing. There's so much waste, so much corruption in the military industrial complex. They're never even required to balance budgets. We need to put an end to this stuff because the Iranian war has shown us that our military strategy that's been developed is not in our national security interest. You know whose interest it is in? It's in the interest of the military industrial complex. That is who our national security strategy is designed for. It's not designed for people like us. It doesn't actually keep us safe, but it does make sure that the military industrial defense complex keeps making more money. They keep making more money, okay? That's what our national security policy is for. Okay? If we had a real national security policy, a genuine national security policy, we would be as smart as the Iranians have been. We would look at our strategic strengths and our weaknesses. And, and we would look at the whole picture. We wouldn't just say like that idiot frat boy Pete Hegseth says, we negotiate with bombs. No, you don't, you idiot. That's just one little piece of the pie. That's just one little piece of the pie. And this shows what happens when you put a Fox News host into the Secretary of War, is what it's called now. It's a serious job. It's not for a jackass like Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth, I wrote this the other day, he reminds me of a frat boy who just discovered meth. He's crazy, man. That guy is absolutely out of his goddamn mind. Anyway, but we don't have a policy that's based on our true strategic national interest because we would have understood what the Iranians understand very, very well, which is that our economic system and the way our economic system operates is a very serious vulnerability for us. I mean, the Iranians understand that. Folks, we were already in a very precarious position when Trump started this war. And in fact, if we just go back just a little bit, go back to Biden, which everybody said is the worst, most horrible, or they all said it, was the worst, most horrible president that you ever saw, anywhere, okay? And Biden was not a good communicator and all that kind of stuff. I agree with that. However, in his last year, Biden created an average of 112,000 jobs per month. In Trump's first year, he created an average of 15,000 jobs per month. And we did see increases in the debt under Biden. There's a lot of COVID spending, okay? Trump, we've seen it blown through the roof, and now we're 89 or 38, 39, headed to 39 trillion. And inflation may cause interest rates to go up more than likely, which means our debt service, our interest on our debt is going to get more expensive, more unsustainable, right? So we don't have a whole lot of spending capacity to deal with these things. And we have just lost probably about $70 billion, $50 to $70 billion in this war. It's cost us $1 billion a day, and the hardware and everything else that we lost in the Middle East, billions and billions. And I mean, there's all kinds of examples. You can go find them all over the place in the internet. You know, in the early days of the war, they destroyed this very expensive, like $500 million surveillance system in one of the Gulf states. They destroyed it with like a $20,000, $30,000 Shahid drone, just like that. You know, we lost $500 million of stuff. I mean, the list goes on and on. You can see this stuff on the internet. So this whole thing was a disaster. And the reality is we just have to cut our losses and get out. And I will leave you with this, however. Even though Iran is probably going to become a nuclear state and it's going to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz. And listen, folks, I have no idea what the Trump administration has planned for Iran. Okay. If they're going to start bombing again, if Trump is going to, take them back to the Stone Age and he's going to bomb their bridges and bomb their electrical plants and bomb their desalinization plants. And if Trump wants to kill millions and millions of Iranians through genocide, okay, which he might try to do, and the Republicans won't do shit about it. Democrats, we can't do anything about it except, you can go to No Kings of Protest, you could do whatever, but you're not going to be able to stop him. The Republicans are the only ones that can stop him. They won't do shit. Troy Downing, I mean, geez, we talk about Troy Downing since I'm running against him. I mean, look at his Facebook. He acts like his social media, whatever. He acts like there's absolutely nothing going on in the world. He acts like everything's just hunky-dory. So he has no opinion on this. He has nothing to say on this whatsoever. And so anyway, there's nothing that could be, the Republicans are the only one that can stop him. They're probably not going to stop him if he wants to do it. The only hope we have is that somebody in there says, sir, if you turn Iran into Gaza, you're screwed, buddy. You are absolutely screwed. And maybe he will. Because here's the thing, even if he does that, even if he tries to do everything, what has happened in the Iranian system is they had this whole plan set up. It's got it's got some kind of code name. I think it's called Mosaic or something. You can Google it. But they have some kind of plan for this. And so if the central government ever got chopped off, it's split up into these regional systems. And they have had this controlling the Strait of Hormuz is number one. It is their like ride or die, basically, for their entire civilization. And they all know that. They've known it forever, that if they control the Strait of Hormuz, they're good. That's their royal flush. That's their strait, whatever the best hand in poker is. That's what they've got. And they've known about it. And their entire national security strategy for decades has been tailored to saying, we can maintain that. And the Iranians, if you watch Iranian propaganda, you also know this. You know that the Iranians have shown that they fully understand how this issue with the Strait of Hormuz is affecting us as a nation. They completely understand that. And they also, the Iranians aren't stupid, by the way. They're very intelligent people. Even though in the United States of America, they try to make them sound like they're a bunch of crazy idiots, they're not. They're actually very intelligent. And they understand that there's only so long that the Strait of Hormuz can stay closed. And this is something that, you just don't hear it from the Trump administration, the Republicans, or anybody. And honestly, I don't know how clearly it's even articulated by the Democratic Party. But if the Strait of Hormuz can only stay closed for a finite set of time before it crashes the global economy. So this puts an extreme time pressure. So it's like you don't have months to learn to control the Strait of Hormuz. You have like weeks to get it done. And so if the Iranians decide they're going to close it, the clock starts ticking. And you go look for yourself. Go watch The Economist. Everybody's saying the global economy just cannot stand it. So I have no idea what is going to happen next. I pray and hope that Trump and J.D. Vance just makes up some bullshit and just quits bombing them. I hope that what we see is just sort of like limited strikes from Israel, and then Iran can keep shooting back. And by the way, folks, I think that if we get out of the Middle East, we will see an end to this conflict, because the Israelis are getting destroyed by the Iranians, and the Iranians, by the way, have a lot more missiles left. They have a lot more missiles left. They have not used all the good stuff. And in fact, they shot a lot of their crappy stuff over first. And what they also did, which didn't get reported widely, but you can see it if you follow the right sources, is they also did things like they sent over flares. And so it was really ingenious. They would send these flares over, and then the Israelis would send up, millions and millions of dollars worth of interceptor missiles, and they were just flares. So they were being very strategic about that. They got the Israelis to think that every time they saw these things in the air, they had to get them, but sometimes they were just flares. They weren't even actually missiles. So again, the Iranians are saving money on the war and waiting for their strikes. All their missile launchers are mobile, so you can't go blow them up. They're not stationary. They thought this whole thing through. And so I think that if we get out of there and just say we're done, which I hope Trump does, he should just call it done, pretend like he won. Who cares? Just say you won, get the hell out. The Israelis will get tired of it eventually because the Iranians are pounding them. And I think the Chinese and the Russians and the Pakistanis will get in there. But right now, the biggest obstacle to peace, the biggest obstacle to anything right now is the United States of America. And it gets back to these two things, and I would just leave it with you again. And I don't care if I'm in the general election and someone wants to quote this against me, I don't care, because I'm standing by it because it's true. Is that we just have to accept two things that have been caused by Donald Trump. One, Iran is probably going to get a nuclear weapon. And two, they're going to be controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And those are just facts about the new world order created by Donald Trump that we just have to accept. And there's nothing we can do about it. Folks, thanks for watching. For those of you that watch this, this will be saved. Leave comments, share it if you like it. Anytime you're on, put comments in, questions, and I hope that everybody has a really good evening. And I'll leave you with this in case you see this. Tomorrow at 12:30, we are doing our first debate with the Democratic candidates in Montana's 2nd Congressional District at 12:30. It'll be streamed on Montana Democrat channel, or if you're in Helena, at the Helena Avenue